Well, welcome back everyone to episode 20 of Along the Road here, where we are bringing the intersection of faith and life together. I'm Pastor Josh here at First Congregational Church, and this is
Katie Johnson, and I am the Children's Discipleship Director here at First Congregational Church.
And like I said, it's our last episode of the season. It's episode 20. We'll take a break here. We'll come back in September. And so we'll have lots of new episodes for you starting in September. We're ready to go and ready to interact and just talk about different things. This last episode, last couple ones, are episodes that Katie came up with. And so I thought of the topic, but I don't know. She came off a book or something like that.
Yep.
And it's on the topic of humility, I believe.
Yes, it's a kind of a rare thing to find humility these days. Mm-hmm. So I was very intrigued. Richard Foster, who wrote Celebration of Discipline, has written a new book called Learning Humility. And I thought that humility would be a great topic to talk about on Along the Road.
Sure.
So I'll tell you just a little bit about the book first. It's sort of written in journal style.
Okay.
So it makes it a little bit different for reading. The other thing that's really particularly interesting about it is that he weaves in a lot of history of the Lakota Sioux
nation. I don't know what that. Oh, the nation.
Yes.
Okay.
The
Native American nation.
Yes. So he took their calendar and organized the book around that calendar instead of our usual Gregorian calendar. And there's a lot of history about them in there that I didn't know. And they have 12 virtues.
Yeah.
And so he picked a different virtue for each month and talked about how it connects with humility. One of the interesting facts, though, that I found in here is that Plato and the Greeks, humility was not a virtue.
Interesting.
To them.
Yeah, I think I've heard that before. I hadn't thought of that, yeah.
Yeah, but it's, so it's like, oh, okay, well, because they saw it as a weakness.
Oh, I see. So with that, before you even started that, so what is, maybe he says it, but maybe even before you started the book, what would be your generic definition of humility?
So to me, humility boils down to putting others before yourself. What about you? Yeah,
I think that is probably a good way to put it. I think humility boils down to being willing to understand that you don't know it all. That doesn't mean that you don't know things. It doesn't mean that you don't have leadership abilities and skills, or you're really good. You're really good at what you do. Some of the best people I know at what they do are always learning more because they realize there's more to learn. And that is a humble type of thing. But I think we confuse it, or I do, with humility being confused with being humbled. And we see it as like you're being humbled. In other words, someone knocked you down a couple notches and put you in your place, or put this in your place, and you realize you had to be humbled, or you had to do this, and so I think it gets a bad rap in that sense. Yeah, so it's definitely different as we look at that aspect. So yeah, I was just curious where the book went with some of that.
Yeah.
And journal style seems very interesting to me as a sense of, it seems like a hard topic, but if I'm going day by day or through a journal style, it's like those little bits help me chew on it a little bit more.
That's right. And so you sort of go on this journey with him.
Yeah.
And so he did a lot of reading in other books as well to see what other people thought about humility. Yeah. And so I have a couple of quotes for us to discuss today. But I first wanted to talk about humility is from the Latin word humilitas, which means grounded or from the earth.
Okay, yeah, very nice.
So practical and the other thing is that humility and humiliation are not the same thing,
right?
Although they come from the same root.
And we tend to conflate the two and get them like mixed up and think to have humility is to be humiliated,
right?
And that's not how it works.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Very good.
Because humiliation. The point of humiliation is to demean or destroy the individual, and that is not what happens with humility.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm interested to see where it goes. I'll love to see what we have here.
All right, so my first quote is from C.S. Lewis, and it's It's a description of humility, and it comes from Mere Christianity.
Okay, yeah.
All right. Do not imagine that if you meet a really humble man, he will be what most people call humble nowadays. He will not be a sort of greasy, smarmy person who is always telling you that, of course, he is nobody.
Right.
Probably all you will think about him is that he seems a cheerful, intelligent chap who took a real interest in what you said to him. If you do dislike him, it will be because you feel a little envious of anyone who seems to enjoy life so easily. He will not be thinking about humility. He will not be thinking about himself at all.
That's very interesting. And so where does he lead with that? I mean, it's a good beginning definition. Right. And it seems like it's near the beginning of the book, too.
It is, yep. Sort of paints that picture of what you might think of someone who's humble being like.
Yeah.
Greasy, smarmy. Isn't that descriptive?
Yeah.
Lewis is great.
He is.
And then, no, he's really not thinking about himself at all.
Okay.
That's the whole point, is
Right.
that when you are humble, you put others first and not yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do that very often, which is why we see that as a descriptor of how Christ was. You know,
Right.
Creator, very powerful, spoke to demons, but, you know, healed people, but was constantly putting others before himself in that type of manner. And so he would have been described also as a humble person. Yeah, so that's a good descriptor for us to think of. Maybe even the reasons why we put others before ourselves. You know, sometimes I find that myself or others, we feign to put others before ourselves, but really it's for a selfish reason, which then is, I guess, not humble in that sense. It just has the appearance of humility.
It's fake.
It is. You know, so it's a deeper type of aspect that you have to think of in our day-to-day life. Like, how can I be humble at work when they expect me to be someone who is moving forward, getting things done, and you can be that person and still be humble.
That's right.
And that's a difficult way to think of things.
Yes, and another way of sort of false humility, I think, is when you are talking to someone and you ask them a question, but you can't wait to jump back in yourself.
Yes, yeah. It's one of those things you have to practice when you're listening to someone. I have the tendency to have an answer right away.
Yeah, me too.
Like it's usually, and so I have been working on the practice of listen to the words, listen carefully. Maybe there's something here to give me better perspective. And I have to, it's not natural for me. So I have to consciously say that. Like if you were speaking, that's what I'd be saying in my head. After that first initial, I have an answer already. I have to push that back and constantly say, okay, I'm going to listen. I'm going to hear where they are. Maybe there's a emotion you're feeling that I'm not picking up on originally. And it does change the aspect of, I can fix this is the answer, to trying to understand you and where you are. To, I guess, in essence, think of them. Why are they sharing this? It's not just the facts. It's not just a problem that needs solved.
Right.
There could be other things that are being shared and picture around that.
And on the same vein, what I have to tell myself is it's not so much important that I fix it as that they tell the story.
Yeah, I think so. Very much so.
So, again, that gets back to who's more important?
Yes.
Me or the person that I'm listening
I'm more important, or my resolution is more important,
or that I show off that I
show off, or they can share. Just sharing can actually solve lots of things.
It can, because sometimes they see, by the process of sharing, they see in a different light what the problem is, and they realize themselves what they should do, and that's even better because now they feel even more empowered.
So there's this conscious effort that you have to do to think.
It is conscious.
It is. It's very much, for me. It is. It's very much conscious effort. It's not natural. That's for sure. Which one's next?
All right. So next we have Philip Yancy, and let's see. Okay. So he was writing originally, early in his writing career, he wrote some books like Disappointment with God and Where is God When It Hurts. And most of what happened to him early on was exposure to toxic churches.
Mm-hmm.
But then he relates a contrasting experience, the transforming experience resulting from a decade in war working with Paul Brand. He writes, I can imagine God gently steering me to Dr. Brand at a critical time in my spiritual journey. Okay, Philip, you've seen some of the worst the church has to offer. Now I'll show you some of the best. Through his extended relationship with Paul Brand, a new assurance crept into Philip's faith, an assurance that the Christian life I had heard in theory can actually work out in practice. It is indeed possible to live in modern society, achieve success without forfeiting humility, serving others sacrificially, and yet emerge with joy and contentment.
Oh, yeah. I believe so.
But I think what struck me is that whole, in our culture today, it's go, go, go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, if I don't put myself forward, who's going to notice me?
Yeah.
And what can I accomplish? And how can I get ahead? And how do you reconcile that with humility?
Yeah, I think not only that's an individual aspect, but even churches have to deal with that.
Sure.
As most churches will begin with the heart of the gospel, but as they grow and maybe they need a building and things happen, then there's an achievement aspect of like, well, we have more people, we have a program, did enough people come to the program, and the heart of the gospel gets lost in that as compared to the reaching out of those. So the next 10 years or 20 years, the church is more concerned about that, the picture of success, as opposed to of having enough people come in, enough new members come in, as opposed to have lives transformed, which takes longer time, which is harder, and is an aspect that removes the picture off of your own success. And individuals are the same way. And I've known people that are like that, successful people. I know a guy who was a successful person in Delaware. He DuPont, chemical engineer, wonderful. But most people wouldn't know that the amount of Bible colleges is he's helped start in multiple countries around the world, and the work that he still to this day continues to do. He's one of the reasons that we have such a joyous ministry that we're connected with in Ukraine, along with the church where I originally met him and my wife originally met him. It's you would never know, but according to the world, he was successful in work, but he was just a successful person. But his heart wasn't about how successful can I be at work. He did his work with integrity. He did it well, and his heart was about the gospel, about the church, about the furthering of the kingdom, which removes the whole picture off of yourself.
Yes.
And yet he was successful. He did really well. He esteemed in his work, and I think if I remember correctly, he had a pretty good position before he retired. So, in the view of the world, it looked like success, and it was, but it also was success with humility marked throughout all of it.
So, what I hear you saying is that it has a lot to do with your heart.
Yes. It has to do with your aspect, your heart. What are you here for? It doesn't mean to be a humble person, as far as I understand, and I would agree with this. It doesn't mean that you have to go live in destitute. Give up all things. The person I'm talking about had a passion for his job in chemical engineering and what he did with the large company. You can have a bit, and you could be worldly successful in that with finances or family and stuff, but that's because God gifted him with that passion. But he also had the spiritual gift of teaching and evangelism, reaching out, and he did not let that go because that was more important. So he actually flipped his script in the sense of he worked with integrity, he was very successful, so that he could do God's work with more freedom.
It was his funding source.
Yeah, absolutely. And still is, because of the retirement it's offered him and those types of things. So yeah, absolutely. And I think there are probably many examples like that, that I knew another person similar, but they and their children ended up being very similar, but they worked, they lived off of less than half of their income purposefully so that they could further the gospel kingdom. And I think in the church at that time, where there was 800 or so people in the church, there might have only been 20 people that knew that. It wasn't like hey, look at what I'm doing. It's just,
well, That gets back to heart, doesn't it?
It does. It goes all the way back, to that heart. Like Yancy was saying, I had to come out of this toxic church and get put into this place to see it can happen, whether as an individual or as a church. Yeah. You can be humble people, a humble group of people in general, and still have success with the gospel and in life itself. Yeah.
All right, so let's look at Andrew Murray is the last one we're going to look at. Yeah. Let's see. All right, so this is going to be in sort of two parts here.
Sure.
Humility is the first and most essential element of discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
So discipleship is a big thing that we're trying to strive for here at First Congregational. But to hear it stated quite so succinctly that humility is the first step.
Yeah.
And I suppose, in some ways, it gets back to that whole theme of teachability.
Yeah. I know there's more for me to learn.
If I don't know it all, then I need to get on with it.
Right. I think that's one aspect. The other aspect is, I know in discipleship that others need to know this as well. Not me. They don't need to know how great I am, but they need to learn like I do. And I might learn from someone that I'm discipling or we're working together. And so you always have that aspect of, even if I'm the mentor, if I'm the one teaching, I am always have the open door to learn coming the other direction.
That's right.
It's very important. It's a very, very key thing. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. In discipleship to Christ, we need to train ourselves to fight the devil, defeating the pride-filled arrogance and raging narcissism that plagues modern culture. We need to learn the subtleties of pride that can seep into the innermost chambers of the heart, puffing up our ego.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that goes back to what we were talking about even with the churches. You do great work, a church may grow in numbers, and then if you're not careful, continuing to the Lord in prayer, continuing learning as leaders, and being attentive to discipleship as your key, evangelism as your key, then you could, I've seen it happen. A church can puff up in pride of, look at how great we are doing. Instead of really just saying, we are just focusing on changing lives. And these lives matter. And last year, maybe there was 100 people that came to Christ, and this year there's only 10. It shouldn't matter, because each person that comes is who you're focused on. And it gets difficult because in reality, I'm a pastor, another pastor get together, and sometimes those numbers come out or things come out you talk about, and we have the natural sense of oh, maybe my ministry didn't go as well this year as I thought because I didn't meet my goal. Mm-hmm. And so there is that, as he said, this natural inclination in us, and it seeps in, and it's usually, I would say, in the unspoken parts. You wouldn't hear me. I mean, I'm saying it now, but when I have those thoughts, I don't broadcast them to everybody. Right. But we do have those thoughts, and if pastors are honest, elders are honest, deacons are honest, children's discipleship directors are honest, we have those thoughts. You're about to have VBS, and if you had one less VBS attender this year than last year, it creeps in your mind. What did I do wrong?
Right.
Where was I? And maybe it was nothing you did wrong. Maybe God used those people for that time. It reminds me of a story when my dad was replanting a church way back in the day in Texas. He said he would drive an hour to this town, a little town in Texas, and for the first several months, he'd go there and he'd preach, and only one person would come to the church.
Wow.
One person. My mom would play the piano, Dad would do the service, and I know that soon they started going door to door, and it helped a little bit. The church started to grow, but he could have said it's not worth it for one person. One of those things they tell you, youth ministry directors said, if you ever are a youth group and 3 kids show up and there's no really 15, and you say, there's so few of you here, you automatically demean those that are there, thinking they're not worth it.
Yep.
So what was your reason for coming to teach in the first place? Was it for the 15 or more, or was it for each individual? And if one just shows up, if just one comes, is it enough? And we have to measure those things as we go through it.
Yes, comparison.
Yeah, and that's where it sneaks in. That's what sneaks in into the pride and the ego. But then if 30 show up, we don't highlight what God has done as much. Oh, this is great, but we planned right, we did this right, and then there's that pride. So you constantly are in this battle, and maybe the key word we've been saying here in our episode is it has to be conscious. Mm-hmm. I hadn't thought of that until we've had this conversation, that humility has to be a conscious effort.
Yes. So do you suppose that it ever becomes less need of being conscious? I mean, the C.S. Lewis quote at the beginning said, oh, well, he's not even thinking about himself at all. He's thinking more about...
Yeah. Maybe it does. It could also look like it's less conscious because we don't see what's going on in people's minds.
That's true.
I think with exercise, like anything, it becomes easier.
Yeah.
But as I've learned, like I said, I'm starting to listen to people better, trying, that has become easier. But then I'm realizing, I really don't listen. A year ago, I was like, I'm doing all right at this. Now I realize I have a much longer to go. So I have to make more of a conscious effort. But it's easier to make that conscious effort because I started, and at first I could listen for like 30 seconds, a minute, before my brain was like, I just want to answer you. I just want to answer you. And now it can go longer, and now it can go longer. And so I think it becomes easier, but until we're with Christ, I don't think it becomes natural.
Yes, I like that differentiation. But I also like the analogy to muscles, in that the more that you use them,
yes,
the easier it gets.
It's the same thing. Just like learning how to be a runner or a swimmer or anything, mm-hmm. They have the little apps for couch potato to 5K, and if you can do that, you can finish a 5K, and some people do that. I've done stuff like that. But now a 5K, after many years of running, it's like, I can warm up with a 5K. So it's okay. I would have never dreamed that when I started. That's the building up of the stamina of the muscles. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with prayer life, with studying God's word life, with humility. But it has to be a conscious effort. I still have to set my lunch, go out, go for a run, do the things. I can't just say, yeah, I'm a runner, and not run for the next year. You can't just say humility is important and not exercise it. Right. It's the same with all aspects. And if it's that key, it should be something we put near the forefront of what we're doing. When I open God's word, I come with humility. You're here to teach me. I'm here to learn. I'm here to be corrected, to be rebuked or encouraged. I mean, it's all in there, but not just I'm here to encourage my emotion right now.
This is not just a review.
Right. Right. I've already read this story before. No, we keep coming back to it. Keep coming back to it. Yeah. Humility is a very important part of it. That's for sure.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that if our goal is to be different from the world, which I think it should be,
yes,
because we don't want to look like everyone else. Otherwise, what difference does having Jesus in your life make?
Yeah.
So if our goal is to be different as a church, I think humility at the individual level as well as the corporate level is really important, because that will stand out so much from our world. Our world is so narcissistic. And
it's true. That's true. Well, I think it starts at the individual level for sure. Mm. And in a church, how the pastor and the staff, or the pastor staff, elders, deacons, they all kind of will mirror each other. The one leading this one, then it'll kind of give a group culture here and a group culture here, and mm-hmm. permeate out. But in your family, it'll be the same way.
Sure.
How a husband is humble and how a wife is humble to each other, with each other, permeates into the children. Hopefully, it's not 100%, but
nothing is.
but they will look, and they can see that, whether they rebel against that or not, they can see that and be a part of that. So you have that. If you're a worker, you can affect the other workers. If you're, a manager, a director, a boss, it permeates the culture, because even if they are not humble and they see you are, it will begin to affect the culture of the teamwork beneath you or around you. Mm-hmm. In what you're doing.
Sure.
So it is individual, and it does affect the corporate sense as well. I think that's very important. But we are responsible for ourselves first.
and foremost.
And that's why, discipleship is that one-on-one. I'm responsible for me, and I'm reaching out to teach others. Humility is a very important aspect of that. I don't come to a discipleship table saying, you have so much to learn from me. We come saying, we have an intern here at the church, and part of what I said, what are the things that you in the church world are interested to learn in, and let's start there, see where I can impart, or maybe you or the music director. Like, we have staff members that can help. It doesn't have to be me. So let's see what you need and what we can bolster, what we can do, what can I impart, I don't know that answer, so let's figure that out.
What can we learn together?
Right. Definitely.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important. It's very good.
Yes, and attitude does permeate.
It does.
Whether you're aware of it or not.
Yes. Yeah.
If you have a resentful attitude at work, people will pick up on that.
Yeah. And it is, I don't want to put it, well, no, it is. The higher up you are in a work structure, because there's just hierarchies in work structure, the more important that is. Because it does affect everybody. It does affect the culture of your unit or your group or your, if you're just working and you're one of the regular staff workers, it affects the people around you. But if you have a boss that's like humble and energetic and doing these things, most of the group will lean towards what the boss is doing, and then they might kind of draw away from you in that sense. But that's that conscious effort and where you are. And
right.
Like, I'm not humble every day. We're not humble, but like some days are worse than others. I didn't make a conscious effort today, that type of thing. And you have to sit down.
And you have to sit down and process and think, okay, where could I have?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard work.
It is work.
It's hard work, learning yourself and growing in yourself in the faith, but also just in life. It's hard work.
Yeah.
I think it's worth it.
Oh, totally.
It's worth it for your own self. It's worth it for the power of the gospel. It's worth it for our direction in life, because when things get really difficult, we have that foundation already built. We have the muscles already worked into place. Because just because you're humble following Christ doesn't mean life is always great. It can be very difficult. It's very difficult, and so you have to walk with that. So.
And it's then particularly in the, if you will, easier times is the time to be more intentional about humility, so that when these other things come up, it's already built in, if you will. Yeah. I don't know.
That's all the workouts in between the race.
There you go.
That's what it is.
Yes.
I think of it like running, because I run a lot. So it's all the workouts in between the race.
Sure.
Between the long run, you have all these little runs. You have different things that you do. I don't just run. There's also lifting and body. Like, it's not just go out there and run. There's purposefulness to it, so that when you get to the race, all of that matters. I help, but that'll get us off topic. But yeah, all of that is important, and I think that's important in the aspect of a Christian life as well. Absolutely, yeah.
Well, I thought I would end with a poem. Now, I know that poetry isn't everybody's cup of tea, but when I was in 7th grade, we had to memorize a poem a week.
Yeah.
And I recently, in the past couple of years, ran across the book that we'd used, and I found this one by John Milton.
Oh, nice.
It's a sonnet. So the sonnet is 14 lines with some kind of formal rhyming scheme, although it can change. And then usually each line has 10 syllables.
Okay.
So it's not, all to say, it's not very long.
It's not very long.
But, so I'm going to read it slowly, because there's a lot, because that's what poets do. They condense a lot of thought.
They really do.
Into a small amount. I will say that there is a reference to the parable of the talents.
Okay.
In there, and what the guy with only one talent did.
Yes, which, by the way, will be mentioned during our sermon this coming Sunday. What is it? It'll be July 1st. So if you're around July 1st on this weekend, you'll hear part of that.
Okay. Well. So this poem is called On His Blindness, because he wrote it when he was beginning to go blind.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But it has a really neat analogy to spiritual blindness as well.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. When I consider how my light is spent ere half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent which is death to hide, lodged with me useless, though my soul more bent to serve therewith my Maker, and present my true account, lest he returning chide. Doth God exact day labor, light denied? I fondly ask. But patience, to prevent that murmur, soon replies, God doth not need either man's work or his own gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. His state is kingly, thousands at his bidding speed, in post or land and ocean without rest. They also serve who only stand and wait.
Interesting. It's interesting that he writes that as he's losing his eyesight.
Right.
And you do ask a lot of questions when body fails.
Mm-hmm.
What is my purpose now? What do I do now? And he realizes that waiting on the Lord and walking in that is very important. It's very nice.
Well, thank you. I liked it.
Yeah. Well, this brings us to the end of our season.
Yes.
And I would just encourage people, to take the time this summer to make a conscious effort to work on something. Humility could be one of them. But make a conscious effort between now and September when we come back to pick a characteristic in your life that you want to work on and take a few minutes every day and process it. That's for sure.
Yep. There's lots of books out there. I'm sure whatever you pick to work on, you'll find a book to help you along the way.
Yeah. And between now and then, you can always worship with us here or online, many different ways. But we look forward to seeing you in September. And until then, have a blessed day.
And a great summer.
Yeah.
Bye.